My husband divorced me because he thought I was useless. What he didn't know was that I secretly built a career worth over $550,000 a year. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I'm Emily Parker, 34, and I was married to David Miller for 9 years. On the surface, our life seemed normal. We had a nice home, 2 cars, and a predictable routine. But behind closed doors, my world was very different. David was never satisfied with anything I did. No matter how much effort I put into managing our household or trying to support him emotionally, he found ways to make me feel small. He had this way of looking at me that made me question myself constantly. If I mentioned a small project I was working on, he would roll his eyes and call me lazy or useless. Sometimes he would say, "Why can't you just be a proper wife and stop wasting time on nonsense?" He didn't care about my ideas, my dreams, or the things I quietly accomplished. All that mattered was that I stayed in the mold he wanted. Every conversation somehow turned into a critique. I remember sitting on the couch one evening, holding a notebook of plans for a side project I'd been working on for months. I wanted to tell him about it, share my excitement, and maybe get his advice. Instead, he snatched the notebook, looked at it with disgust, and said, "Emily, why do you waste your time with this? You should just focus on me, on this house, on being a wife. That's enough." I tried to explain, to show him that I was building something valuable, something that could matter to us in the long run. But he wasn't interested. He only saw what he wanted to see, someone who stayed small, someone he could control. And I played the part, quietly putting my ambitions aside because I thought it was what marriage required. Over time, his comments and criticisms wore me down. I stopped sharing parts of myself because he made me feel ashamed for even having ideas outside of him. He had a way of making me question my own worth every single day. It wasn't just hurtful, it was humiliating. I would catch myself thinking, am I really useless? Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not good enough. Even when he left for work or went out with friends, I felt this pressure to prove myself in the home, to keep everything running perfectly while he judged me silently. I was living in constant tension, carefully balancing the life he expected of me and the secret dreams I was trying to nurture in private. I knew I was capable of more, but I had to keep it hidden. I had to survive the marriage and the constant barrage of his criticism without letting him see the strength I was quietly building inside me. Little did he know, behind every insult and dismissive glance, I was preparing for the day I would finally show him that I was never useless, and that I was far stronger than he ever imagined. Things started to change slowly, almost like a shadow creeping into our marriage. David began staying late at work more often. At first, I thought it was just stress or extra responsibility, but soon I noticed a pattern. He would come home late, distracted, and sometimes he wouldn't even look at me before heading to the bedroom. The worst part was the way he started comparing me to other women. He would casually mention colleagues or friends of his who were successful or ambitious, and then look at me with that same disappointed expression. One night, as I was cleaning up after dinner, he said, "Emily, what do you even contribute here? You don't even bring in a paycheck." The words hit harder than I expected. I froze, unsure whether to respond or just let it slide, but his tone left no room for discussion. It was meant to hurt. I thought about all I had done for him over the years. I had worked 2 part-time jobs to help cover his grad school expenses. I had kept our home in order, handled bills, groceries, everything he didn't want to deal with. All of this I did quietly, without fanfare, because I loved him and wanted to support our life together. And while he criticized me, I had been building something behind the scenes, a career he would never suspect. It wasn't just the comparisons or the harsh words. There was an energy in the house that I couldn't ignore. David started shutting down emotionally. He stopped asking how my day was or listening when I tried to talk. I would catch him staring at his phone, sometimes laughing softly, and quickly putting it away when I looked. There was a tension I couldn't place at first, but deep down I felt it. He was hiding something. The suspicion gnawed at me. I began noticing the little things. The way his tone changed when answering certain calls, the sudden need for privacy with his phone, the way he would avoid eye contact in the evenings. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore the signs. Something was going on, and it wasn't just about work stress. I started paying attention to his routines, watching patterns I had never noticed before. The late nights, the secretive messages, the sudden complaints about my lack of ambition. It all felt like a setup, like he was preparing himself for something. Every instinct in me screamed that he was involved with someone else. Even with the suspicion weighing on me, I kept calm. I didn't confront him yet because I needed proof, and more importantly, I needed to be ready for whatever came next. I couldn't let myself be blindsided, not after everything I had sacrificed. The cracks in our marriage were now obvious, and I knew that the life we had built together was starting to fall apart. And while David was chasing illusions elsewhere, I silently strengthened my plans. Every insult, every cold glance, only pushed me to prepare for the day I would finally take control of my life and show him the truth he never wanted to see. One evening, I went to grab David's tablet from the living room because he had left it unlocked. I wasn't snooping, I just needed it for something quickly, but when I opened a messaging app, I froze. There were messages from a woman named Amanda. At first, I thought it might be innocent work chatter, but the tone quickly made my stomach drop. She was mocking me, calling me useless, and laughing about how David could do better. I sat there, heart pounding, reading the words again and again. The realization hit me like a punch. David was cheating. And it wasn't some hidden crush or small flirtation. He was openly discussing me with someone else, making fun of me as if I didn't even exist. My mind raced, trying to process the betrayal. I had spent years supporting him, loving him, staying by his side, and now he was laughing about me with another woman. I didn't even need to confront him to know the truth. But when he came into the room a few minutes later, I decided to face him. I asked quietly, "Is this true? Are you seeing her?" There was no hesitation in his eyes. No shame. Instead, he looked at me with the coldest expression I had ever seen and said, "Yes. I deserve a woman who matches my ambition. You just don't." I felt like the floor had been pulled from under me. The man I had trusted with my life, the man I thought loved me, didn't just stop loving me. He had already moved on. Worse, he was so unapologetic, so matter-of-fact about it, that it felt like a betrayal multiplied. And then he dropped the next bomb. He wanted a divorce. David said, "I can't be with someone who has no direction. I need someone driven, someone who actually contributes to life, not just sits at home." Those words cut deeper than anything before. I was devastated. Every insult, every harsh comment, every moment he dismissed me flashed through my mind. I wanted to cry, scream, beg him to stay, but something inside me kept quiet. I chose silence. I didn't yell, I didn't beg, I didn't plead. I knew something he didn't. I had been quietly building my life, secretly working towards something big while he looked down on me. This knowledge gave me a strange kind of strength. I let him think he had the upper hand, that he had finally won, while I stayed calm and collected. Even in that moment of heartbreak, I reminded myself that revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with preparation. David was moving on, believing I was powerless, but I knew I was ready to reveal the truth when the time was right. And that truth would hit harder than anything he could ever imagine. I went to bed that night with a heavy heart, but a clear mind. I would survive this. I would rise. And I would make him regret ever underestimating me. While the divorce papers were being drawn up, I spent a lot of time reflecting on my life. And that's when I realized just how much David had underestimated me. For years, I had quietly built a remote financial consulting business. I had started small, helping a few clients with budgeting and investments, but I had big ambitions. I didn't tell David because I knew he would dismiss it. Every time I tried to talk about my work, he would scoff or say, "Why waste your time on that? Focus on me and this house." So I stayed quiet. I worked late nights, early mornings, and weekends, building my client base without ever letting him see it. I learned to manage accounts, provide advice, and grow relationships with clients from all over the country. Slowly, my efforts paid off. I reinvested wisely, kept track of every detail, and made sure my business ran smoothly, even while managing our home and keeping the marriage intact. By the time the divorce started, my business had grown far beyond what I could have imagined in those early days. I was bringing in $550,000 a year. Not only was I financially independent, but I had major clients who trusted me with millions of dollars. I realized I had been living small, shrinking myself to make David feel important. I had dimmed my own light because I thought that was what love and marriage required. Looking back, I understood that I had made sacrifices, yes, but they weren't in vain. I had created something meaningful, something that belonged entirely to me. While David was chasing someone else, believing he was leaving behind a useless wife, I had been quietly building a life where I could never be underestimated. It was a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and pride. I felt anger at him for his betrayal, sadness for the years I had silenced my own ambitions for his ego, and pride for proving to myself that I was capable of far more than he ever imagined. I realized I didn't need his validation or approval to know my worth. The most powerful part of this secret life I had built was the timing. David thought he had stripped me of everything. He didn't know that I had been preparing quietly and steadily for the very moment when I would no longer need him or his approval. I had created my own safety net, my own empire, in the shadows. That realization gave me strength. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like someone who had been underestimated, yes, but who had turned that underestimation into fuel. David's arrogance had blinded him to my potential, and I knew it would be his biggest regret. I had been living in patience and preparation, and now the time had come for him to see the full truth of what he had lost. For the first time in years, I smiled without guilt. I was free. I was successful. And I was ready for the next chapter of my life, on my terms. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, and I could feel the tension in the courtroom before anyone even spoke. David walked in confidently, wearing that smug expression I had seen so many times before. He was convinced he had this in the bag. From the moment the judge called the case, he acted like he was already winning. As expected, the first thing David did was push for spousal support. He looked at me with that same mocking smirk he had carried for years and said, "She can't support herself. I don't see how she's ever going to manage without me." His words were meant to humiliate me, to make the court think I was powerless and dependent. I stayed calm. I didn't flinch or respond to his jabs. I knew the truth, and I knew that no amount of mocking could change what I had built quietly over the years. My lawyer, a sharp and steady woman named Karen, asked me for the financial documents I had prepared. I handed them over without a word, letting the evidence speak for itself. Karen started presenting my business records. She outlined my consulting work, my major clients, and my annual income. She explained how my business was fully self-sustaining and profitable. She broke down my contracts and showed the court that I was making $550,000 a year. Each detail was precise, clear, and undeniable. The room went silent as the judge reviewed the numbers. I glanced at David, expecting him to react, but nothing could have prepared me for the expression on his face. His smirk vanished, replaced by a mix of shock, disbelief, and something that looked a lot like fear. The arrogance he had carried in court just minutes ago was gone. He had assumed I was powerless, that I had nothing, and now the reality hit him like a punch to the gut. I could see it in his eyes. He had underestimated me his entire life. The courtroom, which had been tense but orderly, seemed to shift. People who had been looking at him with curiosity now looked at me with quiet respect. The man who had mocked me for years was suddenly the one who looked small, the one who had been proven wrong in front of everyone. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The evidence had done all the talking. David's jaw dropped, and I could almost hear the thoughts racing in his head. How could I have missed this? She's been stronger than me all along. When the judge confirmed the divorce terms, it was clear who had the upper hand. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, financially independent, and emotionally stronger than I had ever been. David had thought he was leaving a useless wife behind, but the truth was undeniable. He had underestimated me, and it was a mistake he would regret for the rest of his life. For the first time in years, I felt complete freedom. The years of patience, sacrifice, and quiet hard work had finally paid off, and David had no power over me anymore. After the divorce hearing, David tried to salvage something. He approached me outside the courtroom and said it was all a misunderstanding, that he had overreacted, and maybe we could work things out. His words were smooth, but I felt nothing but clarity. I remembered every insult he had ever thrown at me, every time he dismissed my ambitions, every time he made me feel small. There was nothing left to salvage. I calmly told him no. I had given him years of my life, years of patience, and years of quiet effort while he belittled me. I would not go back to being underestimated and disrespected. Walking away that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt the power of my own choices. I had my dignity, my financial independence, and the freedom to live life on my own terms. David's shock was obvious. He couldn't comprehend that the woman he had mocked and dismissed was now completely untouchable by his influence. He had assumed that I needed him, that I would bend or beg for reconciliation, but the truth was the opposite. I had never needed him. The divorce was not the end for me. It was the beginning of a life I had long been preparing for. Meanwhile, his so-called relationship with Amanda began to crumble. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had left him once she realized he wasn't the financially stable man she had imagined. The charm he carried with her faded when she discovered that he wasn't as successful or secure as he had claimed. David, who had thought he was escaping a useless wife for someone more compatible, now faced rejection himself. The roles had completely reversed. I focused on myself instead of him. I upgraded my home, started investing more into my business, and allowed myself to enjoy things I had postponed for years. Travel, hobbies, personal growth, all of it became part of my new life. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from and made new connections with people who appreciated my skills and intellect. For the first time, I felt truly seen and respected, not for what I could provide to someone else, but for who I was. David's attempts to contact me stopped eventually. Each call, each text was ignored, not out of cruelty, but because I no longer needed closure from him. I had the proof I needed, my own strength, my own accomplishments, and my own independence. The pain he caused slowly faded, replaced by a sense of triumph and peace. I realized that leaving him had been the best decision of my life. I had survived the betrayal, turned it into fuel, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. For David, the lesson would come slowly, painfully. For me, it was clear. Freedom tastes sweeter than revenge ever could, and the life I wanted was finally mine to live. After the divorce, I decided it was time to live fully for myself. The first thing I did was buy my own home. It was a place I had dreamed of for years, but never felt I could afford while living under David's constant judgment. Walking through the front door for the first time as the sole owner, I felt a sense of freedom I had never known. Every corner of the house reflected my style, my choices, my independence. With my financial stability secure, I started traveling. I visited places I had always wanted to see, but had postponed because we couldn't afford it, or because David didn't want to go. I explored cities, landscapes, and experiences that reminded me how vast the world was and how many opportunities existed for me. Every trip was a reminder that I no longer needed permission or validation from anyone. I was free to make my own choices, to chase my own happiness, and to embrace the life I had worked so hard to build. I also began giving back in ways that mattered to me. I donated to charities that supported women starting their own businesses, organizations helping underprivileged children, and causes I believed in. It wasn't about showing off or proving anything to David. It was about investing in a world where my efforts could create real impact. Each contribution, no matter the size, made me feel powerful in a way I had never experienced when living under his shadow. Emotionally, I started reconnecting with people I had drifted away from. Friends I had neglected during my marriage welcomed me back, and their support reminded me how important it was to have a network that uplifted me. I also made new connections with people who valued my skills, intellect, and perspective. These relationships weren't about dependence or obligation. They were built on mutual respect and encouragement. The transformation inside me was as strong as the financial one. I remembered how I had once begged for love, constantly seeking approval from someone who never truly appreciated me. Now I thrived without it. I felt confident, proud, and capable. I no longer measured my worth by anyone else's standards. Instead, I recognized my own value and celebrated it. Every day, I noticed the little ways I had grown. I made decisions quickly without hesitation, spoke up for myself when necessary, and approached life with a calm confidence. I realized that surviving the betrayal and learning to trust my own abilities had made me stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever been. This new chapter wasn't about revenge. It was about growth. It was about taking the life I had once hidden and living it boldly, unapologetically, and fully. I finally understood that true happiness doesn't come from validation or approval from others. It comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. And for the first time in my life, I felt unstoppable. After the divorce, David's life began to unravel. At first, he tried to maintain the image of control and success, but his arrogance and overconfidence started working against him. He made careless mistakes at work, missed deadlines, and ignored advice from colleagues. His boss, who had once praised him, began to question his reliability. Before long, he lost a promotion he had been counting on for months. Financially, David struggled as well. Without my support, he was suddenly facing debts and expenses he hadn't managed properly in years. Credit card bills piled up, and his attempts to cover everything quickly turned into more mistakes. It was as if every step he took to maintain the life he thought he deserved only pushed him further into trouble. Meanwhile, his relationship with Amanda didn't last. She had been attracted to the idea of a successful, confident man, but as his mistakes and lies became obvious, she publicly humiliated him. Amanda exposed details of his exaggerations and false claims to friends and acquaintances, leaving David embarrassed and socially isolated. People who had once admired him now questioned his character and competence. Seeing him struggle didn't bring me joy, but it was a stark contrast to the arrogance he had carried for years. He had spent so much time underestimating me and believing he was entitled to everything. Now, he was facing the consequences of his own choices. Eventually, David reached out to me, trying to salvage some sense of importance in my life. He called, sent messages, and even came to my door saying things like, "Emily, you're the one who got away. I made a huge mistake leaving you. Can we try again?" His words were desperate, full of regret, but I felt none of the sympathy he expected. I calmly reminded him of the truth he had refused to see for years. I was never useless. Every time he had dismissed me, criticized me, or mocked my ambitions, I had been quietly building my life, my career, and my independence. I told him that he had underestimated me from the start, and that no apology could undo the years of disrespect. I could see the shock in his eyes. He had imagined that I would still be dependent, that I might give him another chance. But I was no longer the woman who had once tried to fit into his narrow idea of worth. I was stronger, wiser, and fully capable of thriving without him. He left knowing he couldn't turn back time. He had lost his chance, not just with me, but with the life he had dismissed. I felt no pity for him, only a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the person who had once tried to make me feel small was now facing the consequences of his arrogance and poor choices. For me, it was a reminder that life has a way of balancing itself. While I continued to grow, succeed, and enjoy freedom, David's downfall was a clear testament to what happens when someone underestimates the power and determination of another person. A few months after the divorce, I received an invitation to a wedding from a mutual friend. I debated going at first, but I decided it was the perfect chance to enjoy myself and see life from a fresh perspective. I chose a beautiful dress, styled my hair, and went with confidence I hadn't felt in years. When I arrived, the atmosphere was light and joyful. Friends were greeting each other, laughing and catching up. I was smiling, enjoying the music and the decorations, feeling proud of how far I had come. Then I saw him, David. He looked completely different from the confident man I had known. His clothes were rumpled, his hair messy, and there was a bitterness in his expression that hadn't been there before. He tried to act normal, but it was obvious he was uncomfortable. His eyes scanned the room, probably noticing how I carried myself with poise and grace. As I mingled, I noticed subtle reactions from friends who had known both of us. Some whispered to each other, clearly impressed by how well I was doing. They spoke quietly about David's recent struggles, hinting at his financial and professional setbacks, and comparing them to my growth. People who had once pitted me for being stuck in a difficult marriage now admired my independence, success, and confidence. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not out of cruelty, but because the truth had finally shown itself. The woman he had called useless was now thriving, while he struggled with the consequences of his choices. Every look, every whisper confirmed what I already knew. He had underestimated me, and the results were clear to everyone around us. David tried to approach me at one point, offering a forced smile, but I was polite and distant. I didn't need to engage with him to make my point. The tables had completely turned. He was no longer the person in control. He was the one who looked small, embarrassed, and defeated, while I stood tall and confident. Throughout the evening, I allowed myself to fully enjoy the moment. I danced, laughed with friends, and even chatted with some of the wedding guests about my work and travels. Each interaction reminded me that my life was mine to live, and no one, not even David, could take that away. By the time the night ended, I felt a profound sense of closure. The wedding wasn't just a celebration for the couple getting married. It was a personal milestone for me. I had moved past the pain, the betrayal, and the insults. I had proven to myself, and indirectly to David, that underestimation has its consequences. As I left the venue, I felt lighter than I had in years. The sweet revenge wasn't in words or confrontation. It was in living well, in showing strength and success without needing to prove anything directly. The life I had quietly built had spoken for itself, and that was far more powerful than any argument or apology could ever be. Looking back on everything, I realize now that the pain I went through was also a turning point. Losing David, experiencing his betrayal, and facing the shock of divorce forced me to see myself clearly. For so long, I had allowed his words, his judgments, and his disrespect to shape how I viewed myself. I had doubted my worth, my abilities, and even my dreams because I thought that was what love and marriage required. But in reality, I had been stronger all along. The worst pain, the heartbreak and betrayal, became the catalyst for my rebirth. I discovered that I didn't need validation from anyone else to know my value. The life I built quietly in the background, the career I nurtured in secret, and the strength I cultivated through years of patience and perseverance were all proof that I was capable, independent, and resilient. David divorced me thinking I had nothing, that I was small and powerless. In truth, I had everything I needed inside me all along. The experience taught me a powerful lesson. Never let someone else's narrow vision of you define who you are. People may underestimate you, insult you, or try to control you, but their opinions do not determine your potential. Your strength, your ambitions, and your achievements are yours alone, and no one can take them away if you protect them. I also learned that the best revenge is not lashing out, plotting, or dwelling in anger. The real power lies in living well. Every day I wake up free, confident, and in control of my own life. I am proving that lesson to myself. My success, my happiness, and my independence speak louder than any words of criticism or betrayal ever could. That quiet satisfaction, the sense of living fully and authentically, is far more rewarding than any act of revenge could ever be. I reflect on the moments of fear and doubt during the divorce and realize how far I've come. I no longer feel like a victim of circumstances or someone else's poor judgment. I am the author of my life, and every decision I make now is for my own growth, joy, and peace. I surround myself with people who respect and support me. I continue building my career, and I take time to enjoy the freedoms I fought so hard to achieve. In the end, the story isn't about David at all. It's about me, how I turned betrayal into strength, disappointment into opportunity, and heartbreak into freedom. I am living proof that someone's small vision of you does not define your reality. The best way to overcome betrayal, disrespect, or dismissal is not through anger or revenge. It's by thriving, by achieving, and by embracing the life you were always capable of living. And that is exactly what I've done. I live well, I live freely, and I live fully, stronger and happier than I ever imagined possible.